Talking to Mark Stamm. Mark is the president of Greater Atlantic Savings, their mortgage subsidiary.
Greater Atlantic Mortgage Corporation.
I've known you 40 years, and you're correcting me already.
I'm sorry.
This is interesting. Mark is president of Greater Atlantic Mortgage Corporation, which is a sub of Greater Atlantic Savings Bank, which has been around since, 1857 or something?
In the 1880s.
1880s. Anyway, it's very old, probably one of the oldest in Washington, or continuous. Anyway, I've known Mark. This is a little bit of an unusual interview in the sense that, I've known many people in the business that I've interviewed. Mark and I are personal friends, as well as having known Mark for many years. Mark went to Georgetown. I went to Georgetown. Mark was a wild man when he was young, since Reform. And Mark is one of the legendary, and I have no fear of saying this, Mark was one of the legendary loan officers in the Washington area in the late 60s and 70s and early 80s before he became an owner and got into management. It was part of an incredible team run by a guy named Bill Blomquist, which we'll talk about. Anyway, before we get into some of the actual points I want to talk about, everybody kind of likes to know where people came from and how they got in the business, and I wonder if we just kind of start there, how you got in the business.
I was a student at Georgetown and worked in a bar near the campus of Georgetown, and got to know a lot of people from being the bartender there. And one of the people that I got to know real well was the president of a local mortgage company, who offered me a job. And I went to work for him as a loan officer, cold from the bar business to the mortgage business.
Mm-hmm. Was that Bill Blomquist you're talking about?
No, it was Lee Horner company. It was named Hamilton Mortgage.
Oh, okay. All right, now tell me about your success. When you start off, I know that you, pretty much every company you ever worked for, you led in terms of volume. When you started off in the business, what difference did you see between the days when you started and today?
I think it's a very, very different market today. Let me tell you a little about when I started. I started, and I was handed a book of a list of realtors from the Northern Virginia Realtor book, and was after given 2 days of training in the office, which consisted of reading through closed files on my own. I was told to go out and call on the people on that list, and if I had tell them I wanted their mortgage loans, and if I had any questions. If they asked me any questions, I should call the office and ask my boss.
I love it.
So there wasn't much training involved, and it was, needless to say, very difficult at first. I went out and I really didn't know what I was doing, but called and called and called and called and called on these realtors for several months, probably 7 or 8 months. Did very, very poorly. But kept going back every week, or sometimes twice a week, whatever the schedule was. Had everybody on a schedule, and all at once everything broke loose, and I went from doing 1 loan a month the previous 2 or 3 months to doing 30 loans the next month. So it proved to me that persistence pays off, and that did comparable numbers after that, 30, 40, sometimes 70 loans a month.
And you were doing, I don't mean to interrupt, but the thing that's so interesting, I thought, about you from a professional perspective was the fact that you were doing these incredible numbers. I mean, when was this? Early 70s we're talking about? Late 70s?
It was late 70s.
In the late 70s. And, I mean, these are numbers that today would, rank you one of the top 15 in the country without, but for people who really do their own stuff and don't funnel it through these phony lists to look good, you would be way up there nationally. And
yeah, it was. I did a lot of business, and it was, but it was a different business at the time.
Why do you say that?
It was. There were fewer mortgage companies in this area, at least. Many fewer. There was no such thing as a mortgage broker at that time, and the banks and savings and loans made mortgages, but they weren't aggressively pursuing them. So the only people out there aggressively pursuing mortgages were the mortgage companies, and there were There might have been 10 of them in competition with me in my area. Not like it is today, where there might be 200 lenders in competition.
Mm-hmm. But nonetheless, there wasn't as much. There's a flip side to that coin. There wasn't as much business around. The average loan amount wasn't as great, and and yet you did exceptionally well. And I'm personally very familiar with the story of this legendary company you ended up with and its president. But I wondered if you would kind of go over a little bit. I think it's an interesting story. There's a lot of lessons here in the way you did business. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I was at Hamilton Mortgage for a year and a half or 2 years, and I was recruited then by Colonial Mortgage Service Company, which was a part of Philadelphia National Bank. It was the second largest mortgage company in the country. They had a very big presence in the Washington area. They had 8 offices and had some very large percentage of the business in Washington. The Washington and Baltimore areas were run by a guy named Bill Blomquist, who ran just an incredibly good and professional mortgage operation, had nothing but the best people working for him, and did very, very well, and everybody that worked for him did very well. He's a character who's probably responsible for a very, very high percentage of leading people in the Washington area mortgage business.
Yeah, no question.
And recruited them and so forth.
But what were some of the traits that he had in particular that made you all successful?
He ran a very professional operation. Everybody was nobody at that time. People would quote one thing and do another thing, and things would change at closing and so forth. That didn't happen with Colonial. The people that he hired were all very professional. Everybody dressed well. Everybody kept regular hours. Your phone calls got returned that day. It wasn't a cowboy kind of operation. It was a very professional operation.
Mm-hmm. Well, let me ask you, because I'd like to now kind of upgrade that into kind of today's environment. You run a mortgage company, and you've been phenomenally successful your whole career. And I just wonder, were there any lessons that you took with you that you use today?
Just some kind of general business traits, I think, and that was show up every day and do what you're supposed to do, and do what you say you're going to do. Mm-hmm. If you always do what you say you're going to do, and you're in the top 10% of the business.
What about in terms of what you're doing today? I know you're very interesting in terms of your professional company because of some of the niches that you focused on over the years, and I'd like to talk about one of them in particular that you're well known throughout the Washington area, and that is on condos and condo conversions. And where I'm leading, because we have listeners out there that are branch managers and regionals and presidents of companies that will be listening to you in particular, everyone's looking for a profitable niche market, and you seem to have developed some over the years. And I wondered if you would talk about condos and condo conversions in particular, and when you started and how you became very successful with it.
Well, as what we used to consider the normal market, which was the realtor-based, calling on realtors, as that became more competitive, we began to look for things that were that maybe required a little more expertise, or something that was a little less competitive and therefore more profitable. And in the Washington area, there was lots of condominium development, and there were very few lenders that really understood mortgage loans for condominiums. The agency approvals that are required, what the pre-sale requirements, the owner occupancy requirements, and all of the other things that have to be done in order for the agencies to accept condominium loans. And not only what has to be done, not only in a fill-in-the-blanks kind of way, but in understanding why the agencies want what they want. so that if you need an exception, or if you have a condominium that doesn't conform, if you understand why the agencies want what they want, then you're frequently able to get an exception by giving them some alternative way of getting what they want. So I gravitated toward that. I discovered that if I knew a little bit about condominiums, I knew a lot more than practically anybody else. And if I got to know a lot about condominiums, I could pretty much have my pick of condominium projects in this market. Which
you ended up having, quite frankly.
Which worked. It worked very well, and there were, at one point, probably 3 lenders in the Washington market that really understood condominiums. So every condominium developer would approach one of the 3 of us, and we would make a presentation to them and agree to do the project approvals in return for being the designated lender in the project. We would always be the sole designated lender, almost without exception, be the sole designated lender in the project. The developer builder would pay closing costs or points or whatever he would normally pay anyway, only if the people used us, only if the borrowers used us. And we would get somewhere above 90% of the loans in every project we did. So rather than having to go out and sell each individual borrower, we could just sell the condominium developer. If he decided he wanted to use us as a lender, we'd assign account executives to the project. The account executives would become very, very familiar with the project, and we'd go out and show them the project. They'd go to sales meetings. We'd actually read the condominium documents. And in return for that, when the phone rang, it wasn't somebody asking us for a rate or asking us what we could do for them. It was somebody asking when they could come in to make their loan application. So it was a real efficient way to do things. It worked out very, very well for a long time, and continues to work, with the exception that an awful lot of condominium builders now have their own mortgage companies. So that's that knowledge of condominium loans in the Washington area is there are more people that have that knowledge of it now. But it's still having an expertise in that is still very helpful, and we still do big projects and get a very high percentage of the loans in those big projects.
Mm-hmm. Is it for those listeners out there that might entertain going into that niche market? Is it a profitable market?
Yeah, it's a very profitable market.
And what are the reasons for that?
The loan sizes are not big generally, but they're frequently FHA loans, which are good profitable loans, and the borrowers are less likely to shop because the developer pays the borrower's closing costs or points or whatever, only if the designated lender is used. So it's you can make a reasonable profit on every loan, and you don't have to cut your pricing down to something in order to compete with somebody else.
Right, exactly. Let me ask you: is it a bit like the realtor market out there in the sense that realtors feel obligated to list at least 3 potential lenders out there, or is it a straight steer, not in the illegal sense, but a steer because of the amount of money that's offered?
It's more of a straight steer because the condominium builder developer really doesn't want his borrowers going to a lender that's not familiar with condominiums. They run into all kinds of problems generally immediately prior to closing when they're dealing with lenders that are not familiar.
What are some of those problems?
The lender won't understand the loan officers frequently will say fine, everything's fine, and then when the loan goes to the underwriter immediately prior to closing, the underwriter conditions it for 1,000 things that have to do with condominium approval, some of which the underwriter may not understand and may not be necessary and may not be available.
So it's systemic within companies, not just at a loan officer level.
Yes. we get into lots of conversations with other mortgage companies about, hey, you don't need that. This isn't necessary on this kind of a project. This, they're looking for overkill documentation on the project, and it may not be necessary, and it may not be even available.
Mm-hmm. Let me ask you something. What are the differences in your market niche that you go after between a new condo and a conversion? I'm sure there must be some reasonably significant differences in marketing approaches and paperwork and whatever. I'm not looking for the minutia paperwork, but in general.
Conversions are much more interesting, and they're much more one of a kind. So that requires even a little more expertise than a suburban, low-rise, new construction condominium. Conversions frequently have something strange about them, some unusual feature to them. Maybe they have maybe it's one building that has a commercial piece with a residential piece in it, or has we've done buildings with condominium units above commercial office space, and we have air rights leases, and just lots of sharing of utilities or sharing of elevators and that kind of thing. It's very interesting, and it requires working closely with the agencies, particularly with Fannie Mae, who's very, very good to work with.
So those people out there that you would recommend Fannie Mae over working with Freddie in this particular instance?
Fannie Mae in the East Coast, in the eastern half of the United States at least, that I'm familiar with, is very, very easy to work with on condominium approvals and very reasonable. If you can show them that something isn't needed, that they would normally require, they're usually very reasonable about discussing that and trying to get the deal done.
Mm-hmm. What about the government? What about FHA and to a lesser extent VA?
FHA and VA are less flexible. However, if you know how to get stuff through them, you can generally do it. Also, they will frequently follow the lead of Fannie Mae. So if you can get Fannie Mae to approve something, you can frequently go to FHA or VA and say, look, Fannie Mae says this is okay, why don't you go with it? And they will frequently do that.
Well, that's a good trick to know.
Yeah.
Really, in the interviews, we're always looking for new things that help people out, and I think that's significant. Let me ask you in a more general sense. I think there's a lot of listeners out there at your level that might be interested in pursuing something like this. How do you go about doing it? I know in your particular case, it was just through long years of work and getting in early or whatever. But what would you recommend that a president of a company, or whether it's a medium-sized mortgage banker or maybe a mortgage broker that wants to develop some expertise in their market?
You'd be surprised how much you can learn and how easy it is just to take the guides, the Fannie Mae guide, the section that guide that deals with condominium approval, and the Freddie Mac guide and the FHA and VA guides, and read them. And you can read them all in probably 2 hours to read all four of them. And the amount of information that you could get, the amount of surprising things that you'll find if you read them carefully, is just amazing.
Huh.
That's how I started. I was on a plane, and I had one of the guides with me, and I didn't have anything else to do, and so I read the condominium portion of it, and it was very easy to understand, and it didn't take long, and I knew 100 times more about condos when I got off the plane than when I got on.
Interesting. What about another aspect of the relationship? And by that I mean, what about relationships with these owners? Are they different from builders in general that build single families or townies? What are some of the differences in personalities and the way they need to be approached to get business?
Well, an awful lot of condominium developers in our area are only condominium developers. So some of the big companies like Pulte and Ryan and so forth build all kinds of houses, but there's a cadre of condominium developers who just build condos or just do conversions in this area, and they all know one another. They all know who the good lenders are, and they're more entrepreneurial. If you have a source of construction money for them, or acquisition money, conversion money for them, if you can bring that to the table, that's certainly a big advantage. These guys don't have the kind of financing that a Ryan or a Ryland or something like that would. So.
Mm-hmm. What if you're a mortgage broker, or let's say even a small mortgage banker, who on the surface may think they don't have access to develop that? How would they go about sourcing out and finding out where money is available? And the reason I say that is it would seem to me that would be a value-added service that you could bring to the relationship.
Yeah, if you establish relationships with construction lenders in your area, that's very helpful. And the construction lenders frequently either don't have people in their own company that are familiar with condominium mortgages, or frequently do have people in their company that do mortgages, but they don't like working with them. So if they can work with somebody outside of their company, frequently they prefer that.
Yeah, I find that interesting because as we've gone along in here, in a way you've been listing what appear to be some negatives in terms of personalities and entrepreneurial and don't have a lot of money and they're different and whatever. But I see a flip side to this, and what that kind of screams out to me is opportunity.
Yeah, there's quite a bit of opportunity. They're also very loyal. They're among the loyalist of clients.
Do you think that's because of the expertise itself, that there's a comfort feeling?
Yeah, I do, and I think it's because they're smart enough to know that rate isn't everything, and they've probably dealt in the past with people who didn't know what they were doing, and they've probably gotten burned by those people.
Well, they've probably gotten burned by a lot of people. I mean, having been in the business myself years ago, I can remember that dealing with condos can be a little tricky, and you're right. If something happens, it usually happens because you have a loan officer that doesn't know what they're doing, and the problem develops late in the game. A processor doesn't know what they're doing. They're processing it like a normal deal. And I think you've correctly surmised that where you really start getting into a problem is where you start getting into the underwriting stage. And by then, the van is starting to get ready.
Yeah.
You know. Let me ask you, any other comments that you think you would have for those potential who'd like to get in that kind of market? Any advice?
Yeah, just be sure that if you're going to do the upfront work, and that is get the project approved, be sure that you have an agreed upon mechanism with the builder to get the loans, and have something really concrete. If the builder says, unless the builder is your best friend and you've been doing it with him for a long time, if the builder says, don't worry, we'll get you the loans, that doesn't mean much. And you could end up doing all the upfront work, all the project approval work, and put an awful lot of time into it, and then have the loans go to whoever has the cheapest rate that day.
Mm-hmm. I just thought of another quick question, though, along those lines. Do you bring any value added to the table in the sense that you have relationships with title people and attorneys who have expertise in this area that can help developers, or does it work that way, or what?
Yeah, there's usually a team that will work together, and with any given developer, he'll have a favorite attorney that writes his documents, and he'll have a favorite title company that closes his loans. Everybody likes dealing with just one lender. The title company likes it. It's a nightmare for everybody when there are multiple lenders involved, and then lenders that don't know what they're doing.
Mm-hmm. Along those same lines, and I want to change topics in a minute, but along those same lines, what about loan officers? Does it take a special kind of loan officer or a special kind of training for loan officers? In your opinion?
you become more than a loan officer if you can do this properly, because then you can have the individual loans handled by account executives. The applications can be taken by someone else. The loan officer needs to be the person who deals with the overall project and makes sure that everything is going well, and is the contact with the builder. The way we've had it set up is then the account executives take the loan applications and process the loans, or with their processors process the loans. And the loan officer becomes more of a big picture person, and therefore is able to do many more loans.
Mm-hmm.
Some of these projects we've done 300-400 loans in a project.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. There's something else that comes to mind along the same lines, and I'll just throw this out for your comment. My impression from first off, from knowing you and the way you've done business over the years, and a little bit about that business too, is that my opinion is that if you're going to get into that business, unlike loan officers who can run around to the different projects and meet the agents and maybe call on builders themselves, I suspect that, and I'm directing this towards our listeners out there, I suspect that people who would like to get into this niche, that you better have a branch at the very least, or a regional, or if you're a smaller company, the president of a company actively involved on this to cement and create relationships with these developers.
Yeah, you do, and you have to have somebody who is a decision maker involved in the process.
What do you mean by that?
Who can cut a deal up front, and then also make some decisions as the project goes on. There are frequently exceptions made. There are settlement exceptions. There are things that are perfectly safe and reasonable to do, but that are exceptions to the normal rules. If you're able to do those, you're ahead of the game, and that helps you solidify your relationship with the owner.
And does that learning about exceptions, I guess one that kind of comes to my mind is the number of investors in a building. Are there certain exceptions like that you really have to run by Fannie first? Or what kind of exceptions are you talking about?
If you even know those rules, you're ahead of everybody else, and really understand what they mean. Then some of them you would have to run by Fannie Mae, but you can tell Fannie Mae why it's not to the detriment of the project to have whatever situation it is you have. And if you make a good argument, they'll accept it. Mm-hmm. Then there are also loan by loan exceptions. For example, what if there isn't a final inspection, but the unit's done? Do you close that loan? What if there isn't a final inspection, but you have 50 of that builder's loans in your file drawer, ready to close? You certainly have as much leverage over that builder as enough leverage over that builder to close a loan without a final, or without a signed off, something signed off by FHA that has been done. Certain things don't have to be signed off by the agencies. You just have to warrant that they're done. And if you're smart enough to look at them and understand them, you can warrant that they're done. The agencies don't have to sign off on them.
Mm-hmm. Well, all this is kind of telling me that if you're going to get into this niche, that you really need someone at a reasonably high level, not only to make decisions, that really understands the intricacies of the business, especially when it comes to closing.
Yeah, that's correct. That's one of the advantages that we had, is that we always had a decision maker who understood their business, and that was a real big advantage. They were able to deal directly with somebody who understood their business and was able to make decisions. Mm-hmm. So that's a big difference from some of the big companies where you had to go to the main office and wait a week for an answer, and sometimes the answer didn't make any sense.
Yeah, I think I was going to kind of switch topics on you, but we're starting to get towards the end of our time. Maybe have 5-7 minutes left, so I think I'm going to keep this on track the whole interview as far as condos, because I do interview a lot of people that have niches, and they're very good at the niches. I talked to someone yesterday that is the top producer for Chase in the country, and her expertise as a loan officer, it was a fascinating interview, was lawyers. And that's all. She never called on a realtor from day one. She used to work in a law office, got in the business, and it was just a phenomenal story on how she dealt with attorneys and the amount of business she did. So there are niches out there that make a lot of sense. And so kind of to weave this back into condos, are there anything else that you think is important? Some areas that might come to mind. One is in terms of offering financing. Are there any special kind of financing deals or things that you can bring, value-added things that you yourself, your company, can bring to the table?
One of the more interesting things and important things is to be able to offer some subsidized second trust financing that the practically all of the local jurisdictions in our area offer. Very few lenders are familiar with that. There are second trust programs for virtually every jurisdiction around here, and all you have to do is apply for the money. It's virtually free money. It can fill all of the down payment requirements for many kinds of loans. The income restrictions are not very restrictive, so you can make quite a bit of money and still qualify for the program. It's a tremendous source of qualifying people for homes that didn't think that they could, particularly thought that they didn't have enough cash to do it.
Are these programs available? I know in Virginia, are you talking like something like VHDA?
Well, VHDA has first trust programs, but the city of Alexandria has a second trust program that will supply virtually all of your down payment and closing costs. City of Arlington has one.
Wow.
HOC in Montgomery County has a program that will supply second trust financing.
You're listing all the major jurisdictions.
There's a CDA program in the rest of the state of Maryland. But you have to look for it. They are nonprofits. They're associated with the government, and they don't do a very good job of marketing themselves. Frequently, some of them do, but some of them are just very secret. And they don't know how to market. You've got to search them out, and you market the program for them.
Which is kind of interesting. Again, I smell opportunity here. To me, that's nothing more than being able to bring value to the table when you're talking to a developer.
Right. And you'd be surprised how if the developer talks to 10 lenders, you're probably the only lender that knows about that program.
That's really good. I like that. Some of these second trust programs, you said they're not too restrictive, but do they have certain restrictions? Like if, I know VHDA used to have this deal that if you resold using a special one of their programs, I think where they paid closing costs, that you could only sell it to someone else. You could not rent the unit. They had a couple restrictions on these things.
Some of them have those restrictions. Many of them are much less restrictive than they used to be in the past. Some of them are even zero interest rate programs. So some of them have become very, very attractive.
And they pay closing costs too.
Yeah, they'll finance it.
So you virtually can do 100% loan. I mean, in the true sense of the word.
You could truly do 100% loan, and with the down payment and the closing costs really being given to you in some cases, even though it's technically a loan. If you live in the property for a certain number of years, it can be forgiven. It differs from one county to another, but it generally follows some federal regulations. It's federal money that's given to the county, and in some cases matched by the counties.
Well, I think that perked up some ears out there when you said federal money, because there's people who live in all areas of this country. And it sounds to me like there's, from what you're saying, that there's not only federal money available, that if you just look to the local jurisdictions, I mean, you mentioned, 4 major jurisdictions just in your marketing area that each has a separate program.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing if you look there.
Well, I think I'd like to end this interview on that. I like talking about niches. I think our listeners out there like listening about them, and I think they're going to be, especially at the executive VP and presidential level here and owners of companies, I think they're going to be very interested in this interview because few people, I think, focus on condos and condo conversions. A lot of them, I think you kind of indirectly said they kind of get scared at the process because it is a process, and there are a lot of exceptions, and you really have to know your business. So I want to thank you very much for taking your time to talk to us today, and we'll talk to you later, Mark.
Thank you, John.
Great, thank you.